Imagine you commission a master artist, right, to paint a portrait of someone you love deeply.
Okay, yeah.
So you sit down for the unveiling, the heavy velvet cloth is pulled back, and you look at the canvas. And it's them, but it's just not quite them.
Like something is just slightly off.
Exactly. The jawline is maybe a little too sharp, the expression is a bit too severe. So you turn to the artist and ask for a few tweaks.
Right.
You soften the eyes, you remove a scar, you change the posture to make them look, I don't know, a bit more imposing, a bit more invincible.
You're kind of editing them.
Yeah, you keep adjusting the details over and over until eventually the person staring back from that canvas isn't your loved one anymore. It's an idealized fiction. You've completely invented a new character.
Because you paint over the complicated truth. I mean, the real person is flawed, they have their own agency, and they are entirely outside of your control.
Right.
An image on a canvas doesn't argue with you.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise you. We have this profound psychological bias toward things we can manage.
And that deeply human, honestly deeply comforting urge to paint over the uncomfortable truth is exactly what we are exploring today in this deep dive.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. For you listening right now, we are going to challenge your baseline assumptions about a concept that has been debated for literally millennia.
Yeah, we're looking at a great grounding source today.
We are. It's a short but incredibly thought-provoking article by Jamin Bradley. He's a pastor, theologian, author, and an exorcist.
Which is quite the resume.
Right. And his piece is titled, "Idolatry Isn't Simply Replacing God, It's Redesigning Him." Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Bradley is arguing that we need to shift our definition of idolatry entirely, like away from the cartoonish idea of just bowing down to a completely different god, and toward the much more insidious, quiet act of trying to redesign the actual one.
Yeah, and it's crucial for you to understand that this isn't just some, dry theological history lesson about ancient artifacts.
Not at all.
This is a penetrating look at human psychology. It's
Yeah.
really about our primal need for control. As humans, we desperately want authority over the information we receive, over our environments, and especially over the supreme figures in our lives.
Because when we don't have that control, we panic.
Exactly. When the ultimate authority in the room becomes unpredictable, our immediate response is panic. We look for ways to put that authority into a box.
Which brings us to, the ultimate historical example of that exact panic. Let's look at the classic narrative of the Israelites at Mount Sinai.
Oh, the golden calf.
Right. Moses has been up on the mountain for weeks. Down below, the people are utterly terrified. There's smoke, there's lightning, there's this massive, overwhelming presence.
It's a very intense scene.
Very. So they famously gather their gold jewelry and forge a golden calf. Now, the conventional wisdom, the Sunday school story you've probably heard 100 times, is that they simply switched teams.
Right, that they got bored, abandoned Yahweh, and decided to worship some Egyptian cow god instead.
Exactly. But that's not really the whole picture, is it?
No, not at all. That standard narrative is very binary. Like,
Right.
you either worship the true God or you build a new one. But Bradley points to a debate among biblical scholars that completely subverts that.
Right.
The golden calf was never meant to be a replacement. It was a redesign.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The text itself is filled with these specific details where the Israelites point to this freshly minted metal cow and explicitly claim that this is the God that brought them out of Egypt.
Oh, wow. I always miss that part.
A lot of people do. They even throw a massive party and literally call it a feast to Yahweh around the calf. They kept the name, but they completely changed the nature of the deity attached to it.
But logically, how does the human brain even bridge that gap? I mean, it feels like absolute cognitive dissonance.
It really does.
Wait, why would they try to shrink God down like this immediately after seeing all his massive, uncontrollable miracles?
Yeah, it seems crazy.
They literally just watched an empire collapse under supernatural plagues. They walked through the parted waters of the Red Sea. Why try to capture the entire raging Pacific Ocean and force it inside a tiny decorative glass?
What's fascinating here is the historical and cultural context of how idols actually functioned in the ancient Near East.
Okay, break that down for us.
It was purely 100% about leverage. In ancient times, idols were not viewed as merely symbolic art.
So they weren't just statues to look at.
No, through specific rituals, ancient people believed they could transform a physical statue into a localized spiritual space where divine beings would actually dwell.
Oh, I see.
It was a transactional system. If you bring grain to the statue,
Yeah.
the god owes you rain.
So it wasn't really about worshiping the object itself, it was about creating a leash.
That's a great way to put it.
Because you can't put a leash on a terrifying storm cloud on top of a mountain, but you can put one on a localized statue.
Yes, that is the core mechanism of idolatry. By building the calf, the Israelites were essentially trying to construct a tether.
They wanted to tie him down.
Exactly. They wanted to take this utterly unpredictable creator god and subject him to what scholars call a creature statue box.
A creature statue box.
Yeah. If your god is in a box, you can carry it. You know where it is at all times. It becomes manageable, predictable, and bound by human contracts, just like the local gods of all the neighboring nations.
They didn't want a new god. They wanted their powerful god to conform to the manageable systems of the world they already understood.
Right. They wanted the raw power, but they wanted to hold the steering wheel.
That shifts the entire paradigm. It's not about finding a better god, it's about domesticating the one you already have.
Precisely.
And if the historical Jesus was too uncontrollable for the ancient world to handle, what did they do next? Because this human desire to force God into a manageable box didn't just stay in the desert.
No, it definitely didn't.
It collided spectacularly with reality centuries later. They didn't abandon him. They just started painting over him again.
Right, because according to the Christian narrative, God actually shows up in person.
In human skin.
Yeah. And the historical reality of Jesus of Nazareth is arguably the most jarring event in human history because of this exact dynamic. His actions completely messed with everyone.
Because he didn't fit the box.
Exactly. People absolutely loved the displays of miraculous power. Free food, healing the sick that checked the boxes.
You wouldn't love that.
Right. But the actual nature of the man. He didn't fit a single one of the preset expectations that humanity had spent centuries carefully constructing for the Messiah.
Bradley outlines these massive contradictions between what people expected and the reality of who actually walked into their towns.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
The cultural expectation was a warrior king who would crush the Roman occupation. Instead, they got this transient teacher who told them to love their enemies and carry the bags of the Roman soldiers.
Which was scandalous.
Yeah. Totally. He hung out with the wrong people, dining with corrupt tax collectors who were seen as traitors. He was incredibly harsh toward the religious elite who thought they were the gatekeepers of morality.
Yeah, he was too harsh toward the wrong people and too soft toward the wrong people.
Exactly. And then he was shockingly soft toward the outcasts society had deemed untouchable.
It created a profound crisis of expectations across the board. I mean, even John the Baptist, a revered holy man who dedicated his entire life to announcing Jesus' arrival, had a crisis of faith over this.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. He's sitting in prison, facing execution, and he sends messengers to Jesus, essentially asking, "Are you actually the one? Because this doesn't look like the plan."
He was doubting it all.
Yeah, John was expecting the axe to fall on the corrupt trees, and instead, Jesus is attending dinner parties with outcasts. His ministry techniques just did not compute.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Bradley distills this entire dynamic into one heavy phrase. He writes, quote, "The way, the truth, and the life was too wrong," end quote.
Wow. That phrase gets right to the heart of the psychological tension. And this is vital to understand for you, the listener, regardless of your personal theological background.
Yeah, this applies to everyone.
When reality fails to meet our carefully constructed expectations, we experience genuine psychological pain. The ancient world had built a mental golden calf of the Messiah,
Yeah.
a rigid, unyielding enforcer of the law.
Right.
When the historical Jesus walked onto the scene and shattered that mental statue by subverting power with weakness, it forces us to ask an uncomfortable question.
Which is what?
When true, unvarnished reality completely contradicts our internal narratives, do we adjust ourselves to reality, or do we try to force reality to change?
Man, history shows we usually try to force reality to change. Because the real Jesus was just too uncomfortable to accept, humanity simply reverted to its oldest trick.
We grabbed the velvet cloth and pulled it back over the canvas.
Yep. We asked the artist for a new draft.
We went right back to the desert. We decided to redesign him.
And Bradley frames this next phase with a brilliant observation. He says, quote, "God made us in his image, and we have returned the favor. Let that sink in."
It's a powerful statement.
After the resurrection, instead of grappling with the radical, self-sacrificial teachings of the historical Jesus, Humanity started intentionally misremembering who he was.
We didn't want someone else. We wanted something else.
We wanted our own version.
Exactly. We wanted a deity shaped by our own hands, a narrative guided by our own spirit, our own cultural preferences, and our own anxieties.
It's all about projection.
It is. If the real God asks you to turn the other cheek, but your cultural survival feels dependent on striking back, you're going to subconsciously design a version of God who hands you a sword.
And we see this dynamic playing out today in incredibly vivid ways. Bradley provides a specific modern illustration of this redesigning process in his article.
Yes, he does.
Now, just as a quick rule check for the listener, we are bringing this up strictly as Bradley's own sociological observation and critique. We aren't endorsing any political side here. We are just reporting what the source material is arguing to understand the mechanics of modern idolatry.
Exactly. We're just analyzing his example.
Right, so Bradley points to a desire within certain cultural segments today for a Jesus who looks like a, quote, violent, angry, prideful, power-hungry president who focuses his eyes on anything that glitters like gold.
Looking impartially at Bradley's sociological lens here, he's using this stark political imagery to illustrate how deeply we project our own societal values onto the divine.
It happens everywhere.
Every culture does this. We take the attributes that our specific society currently rewards, in this case, aggression, wealth accumulation, dominance, unapologetic power, and we graft them onto the image of Jesus.
Ignoring the actual history.
Completely. We override the historical record of a man who preached poverty, radical generosity, and washing other people's feet.
But wait, is this ultimate proof of human ego? That we'd rather have a deity that validates our worst traits like pride and anger and the pursuit of status rather than submitting to one that actively challenges us to change?
It's definitely a stark reflection of it.
Are we really that desperate for cosmic validation of our own flaws?
If we peel back the layers, it is the exact same impulse as the golden calf at Sinai.
Just with different materials.
Exactly. The technology changed, the political landscape changed, but the human heart didn't. We are still terrified of a God we cannot control.
Right.
The real Jesus demands self-sacrifice. He demands that we love our enemies and give away our excess wealth. That is terrifying. It leaves us feeling incredibly vulnerable in a hostile world.
So we build a shield.
Exactly. To protect ourselves from that vulnerability, we sculpt a new Jesus out of our own modern cultural gold. We create a deity who hates the same people we hate, who values the same power structures we value.
It's just safer that way.
It's much safer. It's a way of building a spiritual echo chamber.
The concept of the echo chamber makes this so relevant to the everyday reality of the person listening right now. We do this in our daily lives all the time, completely outside of theology.
Oh, absolutely.
We use algorithms to curate our reality so we never have to encounter a dissenting opinion. We hold on to idealized, fictionalized versions of our romantic partners, and we get angry when the real, complicated person fails to live up to the character we invented in our heads.
We are constantly building modern golden calves just to manage our own anxiety.
We really are. But in the realm of theology, this creates a massive logical problem. How do people justify this aggressive, power-hungry redesign when the historical record of Jesus' life, his sermons, his actions are so entirely different?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, logically, how do you read love your enemies and walk away with crush your enemies? How does the human brain bridge that gap without snapping from the contradiction?
By exploiting a brilliant, albeit subconscious, loophole in time.
But loophole in time?
Yeah. If you push the crushing into a future that hasn't happened yet, you avoid the historical contradiction entirely.
Okay, so this is what Bradley calls the divine mood swing.
Exactly. This is the final, really fascinating concept in the article. We convince ourselves that Jesus had a massive shift in personality once he ascended to heaven.
Like, he just changed his mind.
Right. We acknowledge the historical Jesus, the one who fed the poor, healed the sick, and forgave his executioners. But we subconsciously treat that like it was just a temporary phase, a strategy for the first century.
Just a temporary tactic.
Yeah. We claim that the Jesus who was and is somehow entirely different from the Jesus who is to come.
We basically split his persona in two. We have the gentle teacher of the past and the violent warrior of the future.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychology behind this is incredibly revealing. Because the future hasn't happened yet, it serves as a completely blank canvas.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Right. There was no historical record to contradict us, no pesky Sermon on the Mount to get in the way of our geopolitical goals.
We can make it whatever we want.
Exactly. Therefore, we feel we have total unchecked control to design the shape of what he might look like when he returns. We project our own unhealed desires for power, for vengeance, for dominance right onto that blank canvas of the future.
So we basically write our own theological fan fiction.
That is exactly what it is.
We ignore the Jesus of the Gospels because he's too soft for our modern sensibilities, too vulnerable for our modern anxieties, and we invent a future Jesus who finally acts like the warrior king the Israelites wanted all along.
We finally got our golden calf.
Wow. So what does this all mean? If we zoom out from the theology and bring this down to the core takeaway for the listener, how do we break this cycle of constant redesign?
We have to distill the fundamental truth here, which is as confronting as it is simple.
Okay, let's hear it.
Christians, and truly anyone examining the human condition, must want the truth, must want reality exactly as it actually is, not as they want it to be, not as their political party wants it to be, not as their cultural anxieties demand it to be. According to Bradley, all other versions of God, no matter how pious they seem, no matter how much gold you cover them in, no matter how aggressively you defend them, are just forms of idolatry.
They're all just creature statue boxes.
Exactly. They are creature statue boxes designed to manage our own fears.
Because you can't put a leash on the truth.
And you cannot have intimacy with a fiction. The ultimate goal, as Bradley points out, is relationship. The Spirit of Jesus is meant to grow us in intimacy with the Father.
Yeah.
But you cannot have a real transformative relationship with a projection of your own ego.
That's a huge point.
If you are only interacting with a version of God that agrees with all your opinions and hates all your enemies, you aren't worshiping God. You are worshiping a mirror.
Ooh, that's heavy.
It is. Bradley closes his piece with this beautiful, grounding thought. He urges the reader not to settle for the fake version, the redesigned idol. He writes, he's worth more than that, and so are you.
He's worth more than that, and so are you. That is a really powerful place to land. We've seen how the ancient world used statues to manage their terror of the unknown.
Yeah, it's a long history.
And we've seen how modern culture projects aggression and power onto a future deity to manage our own cultural insecurities. The technology changes, the language evolves, but the underlying fear of losing control remains exactly the same.
We are constantly trying to paint over the complicated reality to find something safe.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Something to really chew on.
Exactly.
Here.
If every generation inevitably tries to redesign God to fit their specific cultural moment, what does our culture's current redesigns say about our deepest unacknowledged fears today? When we look at the idols we are actively building right now, the narratives we cling to, the algorithms we trust to keep us safe, the idealized versions of the future we demand, are those idols ultimately just mirrors, perfectly reflecting our own modern anxieties?
It's a sobering realization. You pull back the velvet cloth looking for something divine, looking for ultimate truth, and if you aren't careful, you just see your own fears staring back at you.
And that is exactly why we can't settle for the painted fiction on the wall, no matter how comforting it might seem in the moment. You have to want the real thing in all its uncontrollable, uncomfortable, world-altering glory. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We'll catch you next time.